Hi, I'm Dan and welcome to Polar Currency and video number 40. USA versus Canada versus Mexico. The Currency Smackdown 1940. This is the third video where I compare the paper currency that the US, Canada, and Mexico issued over the last 100 years. USA won the 1920s. Mexico took home the gold for the 30s. Who will it be for the 1940s? You can see the link for the first two videos in the description below. After starting my own World Banknote collection in 2020, I noticed a pattern that the three countries' currency had changed at roughly the same time. So I decided to investigate and see who had the best currency. For ease of reference, I use the term describing a time frame that they don't align exactly, so I'm going to use the term decades. So I bend the time a little bit to make it fit, because it's my video. I'll do my best to highlight who or what is depicted, design, items of interest, color, security features, differentiations, and maybe a few stories. And because I'm a good guy, I'm even mixing in a few coins for this decade. For each segment, I'll start with Canada first, followed by Mexico, then the United States. I'll apologize in advance for using images. Budget and what I want to have in my own collection both have limitations, so I'm going to be using some photos. All three countries are coming off 2 consecutive decades of significant change. Currency changes ended for pretty much 2 of the 3 countries in the late 1930s. The currency in place in 1939 for them was going to be the currency circulating for the next 15 years. The reason for the stagnation? 2 of them. The first, the entire planet was cautiously recovering from the Great Depression in one way or another. The second, and much more devastating reason? World War II. All 3 countries were greatly impacted during the war and post-war. Creating new currency wasn't high on the list, but one country did have some major updates during the 1940s. But let's get to Canada first. For the Canadian 1940s banknotes, I have completely bent the decade's timeline. But there's some background needed. Because Canada was a Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, they had a monarch, and the Dominion of Canada didn't hesitate to put the royal family on their currency. So when King George V died on January 20th, 1936, it set off a series of monarch musical chairs. Edward the 21st Prince of Wales became King Edward VIII, but happened to be in love with a twice-divorced American woman. I wonder what the Brits thought was worse about her, that she was a 2-time divorcee or an American. I digress. Well, he wanted to marry her, and the Church of England said, and I may be paraphrasing here, "You sure can, old chap, but then you can't be King of England because we can't have an American harlot as our queen consort." So King Edward took door number 1 and dumped the throne on his unsuspecting brother, Prince Albert of York, who became King George VI on December 11th, 1936, just in time to update the Windsor family Christmas card. You should be asking, how does this all apply to the currency of the 1940s for Canada? Well, 3 kings in 1 year can wreak havoc on the folks that make currency. It's most likely that the banknotes were designed and probably finalized for King Edward VIII during 1936. But he was king for less than a year. I was able to dig up a specimen note with King Edward on the $1 bill dated 1937, which obviously was scrapped. The design wasn't identical to what was issued, but close. It just wasn't paper currency. Along with the Bank of Canada, I'm sure the Royal Canadian Mint was scrambling too. Great Britain's Royal Mint actually produced a full set of pattern coins. Sidebar here, the Year of 3 Kings wasn't just an issue for Canada and Great Britain. Any Commonwealth nation that issued their own currency had problems. Here's an Australian £1 proof banknote, a beautiful note with King Edward VIII. They simply had to replace the portrait. End of sidebar. Well, Canada did the same thing by putting King George VI on $1 through $50 denominations. But simplification was needed. No more other royal family members, but the prime ministers remained. This is one of the very few noticeable changes. The portrait was moved from the left side to the center. While the overall design remained the same, the bordered lathe work and corner denominations were different for all the banknotes. The Bank of Canada also got efficient with production. No more having 2 separate language notes. These notes were printed in both languages, English on the left and French on the right, including the serial numbers. Thanks, Stu Plubeck. I love that joke. This started a trend of Canadian banknote issues having a nickname. The 1937 issue, called the bilingual series. The issues would also lock in the color associated with each denomination, which continues to this very day. The notes also remain basically the same size. With that said, let's get going with Canada's banknotes. With King George VI now on the throne, his portrait is front and center on the green $1 bill. Note that the left side is in English and the right side is in French. The reverse features the seated allegorical figure of agriculture, same as 1935 issue. There are very visible changes from the 1935 to the 1937 reverse. The dual languages is the biggest difference. For 1937, Bank of Canada was moved to within the top border instead of arching over the reverse vignette, and the bottom border now encompasses the English and French denomination text. The border lathework and value rosettes are also completely different from 1935 and 1937. The $2 bill changed from blue to red-brown in 1937. The color would continue through the 1980s Birds of Canada series. The back has the vignette of a seated female representing harvest, which was moved from the 1935 $10 reverse. Is it me, or does the figure of harvest kind of look like young Queen Elizabeth II, or have I just been staring at Canadian banknotes for way too long? Well, my favorite color blue didn't get dumped, but it was moved to the 5, permanently. I'm repeating myself, but I really like the detail of the maple leaves that are incorporated into the bottom line oval frame surrounding King George VI. The reverse allegorical figure of electrical power remains on the 5's reverse, obviously in blue, not orange. The rest of the 1937 issues are the purple 10, with the Roman god Mercury moving from the reverse of the 1935 $2 bill. The yellow-green 20 got a color change for 1937, it was rose, with a reverse change. The allegorical figure representing fertility came over from the discontinued $500 bill. The 50 got a brilliant upgrade in color from brown to orange. Maybe orange is my new favorite because it's just so striking. Previously, orange was the color of the 5. King George VI was also on the 1935 issue, but he was Prince Albert, the Duke of York then. The ironic reverse keeps the allegory modern innovations featuring a seated female speaking into a microphone, but Australian speech and language therapist Lionel Logue saved the day, and King George VI can now speak with confidence. That's the end of King George VI on notes. The Tan Sepia 100 has Sir John Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, who moved from the discontinued 500, although the allegory of commerce and industry remains on the reverse. With no more $500 bill, we go to the 1000 issue, which has a new color. It's now a bright rose color, which was previously used for the 20, and Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier remains on the front. The reverse allegory protection also remains the same as the 1935 issue. All the notes were printed by the Canadian Banknote Company, and there were no changes from the previous 1935 issue, as the detailed lathework, random colored planchets in the paper, and the near micro-printing in the signature area remain for the security features. The 1937 issue did almost take 2 years to get into circulation and would be the only paper currency issued during the 1940s, so I'm really not cheating the timeline that much. That's it for Canada. On to Mexico. Beginning in 1936, Mexico banknotes were reduced in size from 180 by 83 millimeters to 157 by 67, almost the same size as U.S. currency. There were several changes and/or additions that took place when the initial small-size issue was released in 1925 throughout the mid-40s. The primary change was that for the first time since the Bill and Beak time period, prominent historic figures were placed on banknotes. Spoiler alert and full disclosure for the Mexican notes of the 1940s. I'm using pesos that are dated well into the 1970s. Why? Because like U.S. currency, there were no significant design changes. The 1 peso note was the last denomination to be added by the Bank of Mexico in 1937. The front of the new 1 peso kept the series design pattern with the rainbow-style type color. Illustrated in the center is a large Aztec calendar or sunstone. The detail level is so amazing that I have to switch to high-res photo. Can you even fathom being the engraver for this center vignette? It's just amazing and well represents the indigenous people of Mexico. I'll once again point out the use of colors integrated into the printing by the American Banknote Company. Simply stunning, and we're just getting started. The reverse, printed in bold red ink, continues the design of the 1925 notes with a highly detailed lathework border surrounding the Angel of Independence located in Mexico City. The monument was built in 1910 to commemorate the centennial of Mexico's War of Independence against Spain. Visually, this is probably the most stunning reverse of the entire series. The 5 pesos kept a very similar design of the 1925 series. As you can see, it was reduced in size. There were some small updates and tweaks with the border. The major change was the ornate multicolor 5 denomination on each side of the note that was reconfigured. The portrait is officially called the ideal head of an Algerian girl. Wow, American Banknote Company, really good name for that vignette. Well, scandalous rumors surrounded the note. The woman is believed to be Gloria Faure, who was a Catalonian performing artist around Mexico in 1925. The note took on the nickname La Gitana, or the Gypsy Note. But it was discovered that this portrait was created by the American Banknote Company in 1910, 15 years before the issue. You have to love rumors, even if they're not true. The green reverse keeps the design style of the large 5 pesos note. Like the front, the changes were made with different text placement, border detail, and lathe work. Large or small, the design and engraving skill deserves recognition. The most distinguishing design change for the new 1936 10 pesos is the portrait was moved to the left, and there's now only one ornamental denomination at the left center. Like the 5 pesos, there is a story to the woman's portrait. She is Maria Estela Ruiz Velázquez. Believe it or not, her portrait was placed on the banknote because she won a beauty contest that was specifically held to be the face of the new 1936 10 pesos note. The contest required contestants to be dressed in the traditional costume of the Tehuana, who is a woman from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in southern Mexico that are well known for their traditional dress. Velázquez went on to become a school teacher and died in 2004 at the age of 92. Special thanks to Peter J. Symes and CoinWeek.com for this information. The 10 peso reverse is where the designs really start to depart from the large size 1936 series. The 10 pesos is one of 6 new reverse designs that use a unique vignette apart from the Angel of Independence monument. The brown-red reverse is an 1828 panoramic landscape view of the city of Guanajuato, which is also the capital of the state of Guanajuato. It's worth pointing out that the Bank of Mexico seals do not change, and it's not related to the denomination. Despite my best efforts in the Google machine, I wasn't able to find any information as to why. The front of the 20 peso depicts the left-sided portrait of Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez, who is the second-named woman on a Mexican banknote. Here in the U.S., we could only handle the Martha note once, and we were done with women. Josefa was a rebel insurgent and supporter of the Mexican War of Independence against Spain in 1810. Her likeness was also on the 5 centavos from 1942 to 1976. My good friend Joe from the Coin Box gave me this. I actually could have used him for some pronunciation help. Josefa last appeared on the circulating 5 peso bimetallic commemorative coin. Maybe it's just me, but I'm not screwing around with Josefa. Seriously, she kind of scares me. The vignette on the black reverse depicts the cloister of the former San Agustin convent that is now the Federal Palace in Querétaro. The 1770 building was once the home of Josefa and located in a village just outside of Mexico City. This 50 pesos was issued from 1937 to 1940 and is considered a transitional note. It depicts Ignacio Zaragoza, who was a revolutionary military and political leader at the beginning of the 10 Years' War. Zaragoza died suddenly of typhoid fever in 1862 when he was only 33 years old. The green reverse has a magnificent landscape of Mexico City with the volcanoes Ixtachihuatl and Popocatépetl in the background. In 1941, the 50 pesos was replaced with an updated design with Ignacio Allende at left. Allende was a captain in the Spanish Army during the Revolutionary War for Independence. He came to sympathize with the Mexican independence movement and help the revolutionaries. Allende was caught by the Spanish and later executed. You know what I'm going to say? I love this blue note. Simply outstanding. The bold blue reverse keeps the detailed lathework border design that surrounds the Angel of Independence. This 100 pesos, another transitionary note, circulated from 1937 to 1944. It bears the portrait of Francisco Madero, the 37th president of Mexico. Madero was removed from office in a coup d'etat after only 2 years in office. 3 days after that, he was assassinated at the age of 39. This became part of what is now known as the 10 Tragic Days. The dark purple reverse has the vignette of the Bank of Mexico building that opened in 1905. The Bank of Mexico continued the tradition of the bill and banknotes by overprinting the bank seals on the reverse of issued currency. The second 100 pesos of the 1940s was released in 1945. The portrait of Miguel Hidalgo on the left, who was a Catholic priest, a leader in the Mexican War for Independence, and is also recognized as the father of the nation for Mexico. He was executed for treason in 1811 by the Spanish colonial government. The note has a unique color palette for banknotes, with a very light brown being the primary color. The light green reverse is very different from the rest of the series and has a throwback design to the bill and bank banknote era, with the incorporation of a coin in the center. More than likely, this is the obverse of the Mexican 20 centavos that was issued from 1943 to 1955. The 500 pesos is one of 2 notes in the series that places the portrait on the right side. The engraving is of Jose Maria Morelos, a Catholic priest, a military leader, and president of the Supreme Mexican government in the Mexican War of Independence. Morelos is considered a Mexican national hero and was yet another revolutionary leader who was executed by the Spanish authorities. The green reverse has the illustration of the Palace of Mining in Mexico City that was completed in 1813 and is considered to be one of the finest examples of neoclassic architecture in the Americas. It was built to house the Royal School of Mines and one of the first buildings designed for teaching engineering and metallurgy. The 1,000 pesos flips the portrait back to the left side, who is Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec ruler in 1522, when he was executed by the conquistador Hernán Cortés, fearing Cuauhtémoc might lead an insurrection against him and the Spanish. The dark brown reverse of the 1,000 pesos, my favorite of the series, has a fantastic illustration of the Mesoamerican step pyramid El Castillo. It's also known as the Temple of Kukulkan, estimated to be about 1,200 years old. The pyramid stands about 100 feet or 30 meters high and is located on the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico. The purple 10,000 pesos bears the likeness of Matias Ormero, who was a Mexican politician and diplomat who served 3 times as Secretary of Finance and twice as Ambassador of Mexico to the United States during the late 1800s. The dark green reverse features the National Palace of Mexico, the seat of the federal executive. Since 2018, it's also served as the official residence of the President of Mexico. The building dates back to 1522. Now that's an old building. Like Canada, there were no changes to security features for Mexico. Mexican notes were still printed by the American Banknote Company, yet they have the exact same features as the Canadian Banknote Company. Is anyone buying that these were 2 different companies? Well, that's it for Mexico, who did see some significant changes. For the United States, there were only small changes in the 1940s for circulating currency. Certainly, those changes were the signatures. At least the U.S. was down to printing only 3 types of currency now: Federal Reserve notes, legal tender notes, and silver certificates. But there were actually 4 currency types in the 1940s thanks to a $29 million stockpile of Federal Reserve banknotes left over from the early 1930s. They were released in 1942 when the Treasury was looking to avert a currency shortage brought on by the entry of the U.S. into World War II, caused by aspects of converting from a civilian economy to a war-based economy. For more on that, check out my video, Small-Sized 1929 FRBNs. But for the pure currency collector, there were some really exciting changes. At the request of the Secret Service, the plate number size was increased from a ½ millimeter to a full millimeter, and that merited a new suffix letter. $5 and up for Federal Reserve notes and silver certificates went from 1934 to 1934A. Now that's exciting. The $2 United States note advanced from 1928C to 1928D, and the $5 United States note changed from 1928B to 1928C. The $1 silver certificate went from 1935 to 1935A, and oddly, the series year moved to above right of the signature and was printed only once on the note. An interesting trial was done in 1942 to test alternative types of paper. This was precautionary in case the current type of paper couldn't be maintained during World War II shortages. Series notes were made of the special paper, and an exact total of 2.368 million for both notes were produced from $1 silver certificate 1935A series, according to the PMG website. These notes were printed with a red S to the right of the Treasury seal, while notes of the control group were printed with a red R. Because they have collector value, fake red S and Rs have been applied to regular Series 1935A notes to try to pass them off at a higher value. Check the note serial numbers. Serial numbers of the R group range from 70884001 to 7206800, and the numbers of the S group range from 73884001 to 75068000. They all have the same prefix and suffix letters S and C. The test was a failure as people kept the notes as a collectible or just for the oddity. Footnote on experimental notes: there were actually 2 other previous tests. That's another video. I'm going to only briefly touch on the emergency currency issue during World War II. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, ushering the U.S. into World War II, emergency currency was needed in case Japan invaded the territory of Hawaii. All the currency was replaced with Hawaii overprint notes in denominations of 1, 5, 10, and 20. This was for civilian use on the islands and the military in the Pacific theater of war. The military was paid with the Hawaii overprinted Federal Reserve notes. In North Africa and Europe, special $1, $5, and $10 silver certificates were issued with a yellow, not gold, but a yellow seal, but only to those in the military. Civilians never had them in circulation. More on these notes in another upcoming video. The $1 1935B through D silver certificate is the only circulating $1 bill with First President George Washington. The Great Seal of the United States is maintained on the reverse. Thomas Jefferson, the third president, is on the $2 1928 D through F series. Like the one, there was only one single $2 type issued. Jefferson's home, Monticello, which he designed, remains on the reverse. 16th President Abraham Lincoln's iconic image is on the $5 Federal Reserve note, United States note, and this time I'm showing the silver certificate. All 3 versions were issued with 3 different series year suffix letters. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. is on the reverse. None of the remaining denominations had any major design or subject changes throughout the 1940s. I'll start the fronts with Founding Father and First Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton on the 10 silver certificate. War of 1812 hero and 7th President Andrew Jackson on the 20, Civil War hero and 17th President Ulysses S. Grant on the 50, and Founding Father and Inventor Benjamin Franklin on the 100. Moving on to large denominations, the 500 has the 24th President William McKinley and were only printed for Series 1934A and 1934B, which the Bureau of Engraving and Printing indicates the production of these notes, but none have ever been seen, and the 1934C, which was issued only for Boston and New York Federal Reserve banks. I have a guest appearance thanks to my brother-in-law. He loaned me his 1000 Series 1934 Federal Reserve note with the 22nd and 24th President Grover Cleveland. This note is considered the dark seal variety, even though it's very bright. Hey, no one ever said currency numismatics would make sense. The 1000 was issued for Series 1934A, and like the 500, the 1934C was only issued for the Boston and New York Federal Reserve. The 5000, with the father of our Constitution, 4th President, and the most wicked widow's peak I've seen, maybe he thought it would make him look tall. He was the shortest president at 5'4". The 5000 is the rarest of all small-size Federal Reserve notes. There was only the 1934A from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and the Boston and New York were the only Federal Reserve banks to issue the 1934B, and New York only printed 12. Yes, you heard me correctly, 12! That can't even be worth it. This according to the Paper Money of the United States book, and honestly, are you really going to argue with the Friedbergs? Salmon P. Chase remains on the 10,000. He was the 25th Secretary of the Treasury, serving in Lincoln's cabinet, and later became the 6th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The note was issued for Series 1934 and 1934A, but only for the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank. A 1934B was printed in a minuscule number, 24. 24, really? It's like the 12. I'm serious, what was it worth printing? The most interesting thing about the 10,000 is that it's the only circulating small-sized note to use a comma in the numerical denomination. The 1 and the 5,000 don't. Thanks to Ontario 100 for bringing this fast fact to my attention. With the exception of the reverse plate numbers, there were no changes in design. The 10 had the U.S. Treasury building, the 20 had the White House, the last issued without the Truman balcony, the 50 displays the U.S. Capitol, the 100 has Independence Hall, then the boring issues with the 500, 1,000, and 5,000, and 10,000. The 1940s will be the last decade to include large denomination banknotes. According to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing website, 1945 was the last year that these denominations above 100 were printed and circulated. In relation to the lack of U.S. currency changes during the 1940s, it's worth mentioning that the Bureau of Engraving and Printing did have their hands really full. They produced 8 series of war bonds in 4 years that was needed to raise an additional $9 to $15 billion to help defray the costs of World War II for the United States. And let's not forget, the BEP still had to make stamps. That's what Canada, Mexico, and the United States issued for circulating currency during the war years of the 1940s. So, who will be the Smackdown winner for the 1940s? Let me tell you, it was really close. Well, is it Canada, Mexico, or the United States? The winner is Canada! Mexico was a very close second. I almost called it a tie, but that's just for soccer. Canada took top place for having to crank out the 1937 in a quick damn hurry thanks to the abdication of King Edward VIII, not to mention the colors and reverse vignettes. Well, what do you think? Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. That's it for video number 40. Up next is the 1950s when one country gets a really big redesign. As always, I appreciate your time. If you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for checking in.